Welcome to Stories from Site, the renovation podcast that digs a little deeper. I'm Amy Dornalick, and together with my co-host Jane Middlehurst, we peek behind the curtains of those Insta-worthy interiors to bring you the real processes people went through to make their dream homes a reality. This week we talked to Ella, who chose to work with a design and build company to create a loft extension for her home. We talked to her about the hurdles she went through to get to the finish line and the pros and cons of the renovation route she chose to take. Ella, welcome to Stories from Site. You have a bit of a whirlwind story. Do you want to dive in and tell us?
Oh, yeah. I mean, where do you want me to start? To go back to the very beginning. So we bought this house in 2020, and that was quite a whirlwind process as well, because it was in between the lockdowns. We only viewed 2 properties in person. We did most of our searching remotely. But we had quite specific search criteria. So when we saw this house, we knew it ticked all our boxes and the right location for us. And it actually had planning permission already granted at the time for a loft conversion and an extension to the kitchen. The previous owner was actually a structural engineer, so he had gone all out with his plans and, had proper architectural drawings and 3D renders and all sorts of fancy stuff that they were very happy to hand over to us. So that was definitely part of the appeal, that it's a sort of smallish 3-bed house, but it had this potential to expand. And it was in an area that we could see ourselves staying in, and had the garden for the dog. Then, because of the lockdowns and everything else, we moved in, didn't really get around to doing anything else with the house beyond starting to do a little bit of research and doing some sketches and talking to you guys, doing your course in early 2021. But the planning expired in 2021, and so we hadn't kind of got ourselves together to sort of utilise that before that date. But having said that, the plans, especially for the loft that the previous owners had put through, we didn't like. We sort of thought they were quite complicated. They were going to be very expensive. We're in a conservation area, and I don't know how they got the planning approved, because they had sort of done this quite fancy design for a very big kind of glass box type dormer window. That you'd have had to sort of crane in this massive pane of glass. And my brother-in-law is actually used to be a building surveyor. So he was really useful in kind of being like, I think that's going to be quite tricky to do and that's going to be expensive. So we thought, well, we know that we should be able to get planning. There's plenty of other properties in the area that have quite decent standard loft conversions. So let's just go back to the drawing board and do our own thing in the end. So life then got in the way. We were planning our wedding, lockdowns, jobs. Fast forward to the end of 2022. And we were starting to think more seriously about now's the time to start sort of seriously looking at doing the loft extension. And we had basically decided at that point to go with a design build company to do the loft conversion, because what we wanted to do was fairly straightforward. Like I said, wasn't fancy architecturally, and having done some small scale projects in the past in my old flat, we redid the kitchen and the bathroom, relatively small project. But I had project managed that all myself. My granny used to be a kitchen designer, and my parents have done a few renovations in the past. So kind of we could keep it in the family, and I could do the drawings. We worked with a friend of a friend who was a builder to sort of do that all ourselves. I think I just knew this time round I didn't have the time to kind of project manage in that level of detail, and that actually going with a design build company who would sort of just do the whole thing from start to finish would be simpler. So before Christmas, I had started to get some quotes. I think I contacted 3 companies in the end who came in and gave us quotes. People that I'd found literally by looking at, the scaffolds of other properties in the area who were having their lofts done and which companies they were using, and then looking them up. So I knew this company had done other very similar projects in the area. And so we got 3 quotes, and theirs was kind of the mid-price one, but they also did extensions. We knew that if we wanted to do the extension further down the line, we could come back with the same team. So they gave us quotes for both, but ultimately we decided just to go ahead with the loft conversion for the time being.
And Ella, what was your reason not to do both the parts of the project at the same time?
Well, it was partly a financial thing to kind of spread the cost over a couple of years rather than doing it all in one go. It was also a timing thing because around the same time, like I said, I think it was the end of November, we'd sort of been getting these quotes. And then I found out I was pregnant at Christmas. So that kind of ramped up the time scale and the need for the space and everything else. But it also meant that realistically, we realised, counting backwards from my due date, which was mid-August, that even if we kind of got our acts together and, sign a contract with this company straight away, got the planning in straight away, everything went super smoothly, we wouldn't have time to do both the loft and the extension. We thought, let's just get the loft done first. That should be fairly quick. We can get it done before the baby arrives and then do the extension separately, hopefully next year.
And who won the race? Did the loft arrive or the baby?
The baby won the race because the baby came 3 weeks early. So yeah, that was an interesting part of the process. So yeah, we went back to Simply Easy in January and said, okay, yes, we want to go with you. And by the way, I'm expecting a baby in August. Can we get a move on? And they said, yeah, that's great. We'll do our best. And we spent about a month kind of doing the plans with them. They got the planning permission. That took longer than expected because we were a little bit cheeky. The designers, to give them credit, had done these drawings with a slightly smaller dormer, and we went back to them and said, can we make the dormer a bit bigger? Can we have a Juliet balcony? Can we have 3 windows at the front? And this was all based on the fact that, the previous planning permission we had the drawings for, we could see they'd had permission for 3 Velux windows at the front and this big glass box dormer. So we thought, well, there's no reason why our very much more stylistically in keeping with the conservation area, but slightly bigger dormer shouldn't get permission. We can see a house literally from our window that has a Juliet balcony in their dormer, all these things. It felt very logical that it would be granted. And the designer did come back and say, well, are you sure? Like the planners can be quite strict about these things, and we were like, no, it'll be fine. Like it's on us. So obviously then the planners came back to us after, I think we chased them after about 6 weeks and said, how's it looking? And they said, well, as it currently stands, we're not likely to approve for X, Y, and Z reasons because it's too big. The dormer's too big, basically. And, we only want you to have 2 windows and they're not in line, all this kind of detail. So we argued back and we said, well, look, here's all these other properties in the area that have similar things. This property had permission granted before for a different, a scheme that was less in keeping. I think, there's leeway here. But we did have to compromise. They did allow us to resubmit drawings under the same application rather than withdrawing and reapplying, because that would have, obviously then we'd have had to wait another 2 months for planning, and I just needed to get things done fast. So we resubmitted drawings, which was basically the drawings the designer originally suggested. So, we were like, okay, you win. You were right.
How did you feel about that? Did you feel frustrated? I mean, it seems arbitrary, doesn't it?
It was incredibly frustrating. It felt very arbitrary, and wanting to be overly critical of the planning department in my local borough, but there were some of the things that they said where they were basically like saying like, oh, well, previous bad precedent doesn't count. And I was like, well, that's not, it kind of does. This previous permission was only granted in 2019. It's not, I think they tightened things up in 2021 and started to be a bit stricter about things. But I'm like, you can literally walk around the area and there's a house around the corner that's got 4 Velux windows on the front and they're all higgledy-piggledy. But it did just feel like, come on, guys. None of our neighbours objected. Nobody cared. They were very supportive and enthusiastic. So it was really frustrating, yes, especially because it then delayed us further. And I really think those kind of 10 centimetres can make all the difference in a space like this. But we got there. They finally granted permission for the revised scheme. And then the way the design build team work was that they wouldn't do the structural drawings until that permission was granted. But then they did that within a week, and they have like a rolling kind of schedule where as soon as permission is granted, they can start on site within 2 to 3 weeks, which was one of the, main bonus reasons for going with them, that we knew they could move quickly. So they were due to start on site then on the 15th of May. We had our pre-site meeting with the project manager, who was fantastic, Antonas. I'm going to give him a shout out. So the design build company contracted with a brilliant team called IC Solutions, Inspired Construction Solutions, I think that was the name of the company. They were really, really brilliant builders, and Antonas was the project manager, and yeah, he went above and beyond. But we had our pre-construction site meeting on the 10th of May, and he was looking around and everything. Bear in mind, we'd had a survey when we bought the house. The designers had obviously come and done all the measurements. He came on site and he looked around the loft and he immediately went, "You've got asbestos." And we were like, "Oh no, that's just the worst thing." And he also spotted that the designers had not quite accurately done some aspects of the structural drawings because of the way the chimney flue comes up through the loft. We couldn't put a structural beam into the chimney breast, and they'd missed that on the structural drawings initially. So, just goes to show that the builders are the ones that really know what's going on. So they then had to revise the structural drawings to put in an extra beam, extra expense in order to get around that. So we've already lost a month to the planning taking longer than it should have. And now we lost another month to the asbestos because we spent a week getting a proper asbestos survey and getting all the tests back. And then we had to give the council 2 weeks notice that we were going to remove the asbestos because the type that was in the loft did require the kind of full hazmat approach. And then it took a week for them to do all of the asbestos removal. So it meant that they couldn't get on site to start on the actual loft work until mid-June in the end. So it did delay that a full month. But yes, we're now mid-June. I'm due mid-August. It's a 12-week project and we've basically got like 10 weeks max. And I was very much, hoping as a first-time parent, first-time mum that, the baby is more likely to be late than early. But yeah, so we moved out. We went to stay with my parents. We live in South London. My parents live in North London. So we weren't that far away, but it was, depending on the traffic, depending on the trains, it does take over an hour to get between the two. Mm. So that was quite challenging once the work actually started. We couldn't be on site every day. I was still working and I was, getting more heavily pregnant every day. My partner was still working. He works from home. He was quite flexible, but, we had a lot of stuff going on. And so that was quite tricky.
Did the design and build company, did you feel like they needed your input or were they quite happy to get on with it?
They were quite happy to get on with it, but there was still a lot of input that happened. Yeah. And I was speaking to the project manager pretty much every day, either on the phone or on WhatsApp. But there were just a lot of small decisions, and the way it had worked with the design builders, they'd given us the quote for sort of fixed price for a sort of a basic, this is up to this level of basic stuff. And, when we had that site meeting in May, he had gone through the quote again with us and said, this is exactly what you're getting. But then any extras that we wanted, if we wanted their team to do things like installing the floor, doing the decorating, actually doing the tiling and the installation of the bathrooms, that was all kind of extra to the original quote, which was just for the basic build. And because we were time constrained, it made more sense for us to just go with them to do all of that stuff rather than trying to save money
and commit to DIY.
Committing to DIY or, finding other contractors to do those bits. There was a lot of back and forth with them about asking their advice on what's the minimum width I need to allow between the bath and the wall to fit a toilet in. And, but all of those decisions were mine, picking the tiles, all that interior stuff, obviously, and, ordering stuff to be delivered to site. And that was where it got a little bit chaotic, to be honest with you, because we weren't on site ourselves every day.
And it's a lot of work, isn't it? I mean, when you actually list out how many things go into a bathroom, it amounts to quite a lot of different decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. And in a way, the fact that we were constrained for space was helpful because I was like, well, I can only look at sinks that are this, I think our sink is 420 wide because that was the space that we had, most details we got right, but there's still a couple of things like I regret the tap choice, not because it doesn't look great, but because it's actually the spout is too short. The tap doesn't come out far enough. So you're sort of washing your hands right up against the edge of the sink. And that's kind of really annoying. So there were some details like that because we were trying to do things in a rush. But one thing I did just to try and make it simpler was we just picked everything from Victorian Plumbing. And I was like, that's the supplier we're going to use. Tops Tiles, Victorian Plumbing. I'm not going to spend ages kind of looking at too many different options because they can generally deliver stuff within 3 to 5 working days. And they're the fastest. They've got huge stock. And, I don't have time to sort of pick my dream bath or dream shower if it's going to take 3 weeks to be delivered. That's going to hold us up. So it was always about like, how fast can we make this happen? But yeah, and obviously every decision, when it comes to aesthetic decisions, we were wanting to make as a team, wanting to discuss with my partner, but with everything else going on in our busy lives, like finding the time to have a conversation about tiles over dinner when you've had a long day and you're really tired and your feet are swelling up because you're 7 months pregnant. You don't always have the energy for that conversation. If we'd given ourselves more time to kind of plan out all of those choices beforehand, then we'd have been ready to order and sort of go when the decision came. But, Antonas would say, oh, don't worry, you've got time. I don't need the decision. I don't need to know what tiles we're getting for a couple of days. I was like, a couple of days is not a long time. Like that's still, so it was a lot of stuff happening very fast.
So now that you are in and you're enjoying the space, how do you feel about the choice of prioritizing time? Do you wish that you had given yourself a bit more time?
Yeah, I think if we had had more time to give ourselves, it would have been better. And I think there are certain small details and this goes back to the design process. Like I said, with the design build process, when we first started talking to them, they sort of said, yes, we handle all that. And they obviously did the exterior drawings, but the drawings you have to do for planning permission are fairly simple. And there wasn't a lot of detail on the inside stuff. And Antonas said, our project manager said, owners get confused because then the only measurements they get given on those layouts are the external measurement. And actually it might say it's 3 meters wide, but once you've got all the walls and the insulation and the plasterboard and the skirting board and everything on, you've lost 20 centimeters or more to that. And I think it would have been good if we'd had more time to interrogate that internal design. And that was partly me not knowing that was something I would need to advocate for, and partly a time thing. Because I did ask about it and they sort of said, oh, your project manager will go through all of that. But because we were so fast off the mark to get things done, I think those conversations kind of got a bit rushed or things got missed. And there's things like when the electrician came round and sort of said, okay, what electrical points do you want where? And it was kind of a thing where pre-included in the price were sort of 15 electrical points in the room. And then if we wanted extra sockets or lights, that would be additional. That's absolutely fine. And we had it in our minds on the drawings, like, right, the bed is going to go here in the dormer window. So you've got lots of space when you come in. And so we were going to have 2 wall lights. And we said, okay, but this was the thing. They were on site at 8 a.m. I had a really bad night's sleep the night before. I just wasn't well enough to get up at 7 a.m. and make the journey down to go round the site with them and say, yes, this is where we want the sockets to be. So we had to do it over a video call. So we were sort of going in the room going, yeah, socket there, socket there. And then that weekend when we came and they'd already kind of done part of the first fix, there was no insulation or anything yet, but they'd put the wiring in. And we looked round and we measured and we said, hang on, this is not wide enough for a bed. We can't fit a bed in this space. The only place we can fit a bed in this room is now under the sloping roof. And it's going to have to be a queen size bed. It can't be any bigger than that. And that means we don't want those wall lights where they are because we're going to end up using that wall for something else. So we then had to go back to them and say, actually, can we change where those sockets are going to go? And that's those kinds of compromises that we had to make, where if we'd had a little bit more time to really interrogate the internal layout and the plan to say, right, what are the internal measurements what are they going to be? Where do we want all these electrical points? All those design decisions. we were making on the trot as we went along. And it was frustrating because we had those wasted months where we were waiting around for the planning permission and waiting around for the asbestos. And I think I completely appreciate and understand why they don't get into that level of detail until they know the planning permission has been granted. But that doesn't then leave, if you're then starting on site 3 weeks after that, very much time to be like, right, okay, this is what it's actually going to be like internally, and this is the exact sizing.
I think what's interesting is I think your experience really sums up both the advantages and the disadvantages of design and build, because I think in terms of the speed and efficiency of the process, I mean, the fact, I think you said 10 weeks, shy of 10 weeks, they made your loft, that's incredible.
Yeah, I just did the math on it. That 10 weeks included the week of asbestos removal and the week that they were only working on the bathroom. So the actual loft work, including the decorating, was 8 weeks, which is astonishing.
It's incredible, yeah. But then on the kind of flip side of that, it's frustrating that you haven't been able to have those conversations. But I think it illustrates that those conversations need to be had, and it can either happen early and it takes longer, the process, or they happen on site and you're reacting in the moment to the thing that you're being asked, and there's less proactiveness to the process.
And even if those conversations had been happening on site, but we'd had the full 12 weeks or 14 weeks to do the project, and we'd been able to be on site more regularly, like, 2-3 times a week. Ideally, I'd have liked to be here and looking around and seeing what was going on and sort of measuring for myself, and still being a little bit more hands-on.
The whole convenience of the design and build, the cost certainty and the speed is all around the shell. The shell, like you said, it's just this external structure of this loft or extension. And I think sometimes there's a misunderstanding that the extra prices for fitting tiles, fitting flooring, for fitting the inside of your project was additional in cost to that upfront price that you got. And it's, as you said, it's totally understandable why that happens, because that's within the company's control and they can predict the materials for that, whereas they don't know what flooring you're going to choose or what bath or shower. I know that you had said that you wanted less on your plate, but it's good for people to know up front that internal work all reverts back to you again. So in a way, you're doing more of the legwork for a design build contract on that interior space than you would potentially if you had an architect that did the shell and interiors. You're going to pay more, obviously. Somebody has to work it out. But once you have somebody drawing up those internal drawings for you, that's very different from that basic drawing at planning. Having somebody check that everything fits and work before you're on site, it really does help in that way. So I guess it's really interesting just to hear your process, because it could help people decide which route is going to be good for them, or how to be proactive about asking somebody to work out that internal space with them.
And the costing as well. Again, we could have spent a bit more time really interrogating, right, what's included and then what extras are we definitely going to need. Although they were very clear about what they were quoting and they went through the quote with us multiple times, there was no, they weren't trying to pull the wool over our eyes or anything. But there, it was things like then, oh, okay, by the way, you need to replace all the doors on the first floor because they're not fire doors. And those are, however much, £300, I think, each or something like that, so suddenly that's an extra £1,000 of cost to replace 3 doors that we didn't anticipate. Obviously, the asbestos removal in the survey, that was several £1,000s of unexpected cost. Obviously, that's exactly what you have a contingency for. And that wasn't any fault of the builders that we had that. But, we knew from the beginning that we were going to do the rewiring, we were going to do the decorating, that we'd prefer them to install the floor and all this kind of stuff. And I think it did feel a lot of the time like we were kind of being told, okay, it's going to cost this much to do this next thing. And we had no choice but to go, yes, okay, let's get on with it. Let's just do it. And you are then kind of forced to accept that cost. You don't have that much negotiation room because they're already on site, they're ready to go. So the final cost of the whole thing was probably twice what the original quote was by the time that all those extras were sort of added on.
Like you said, not being taken for a ride. It is just simply the fact that from a client perspective, receiving extra costs as you go through and not being able to verify or check them, that's just stress inducing, isn't it? Nobody's necessarily doing anything wrong, but the process itself is maybe not set up for feeling good about the situation and what's happening.
And it was a thing of our own making, because they were only, after all, doing what we asked of them, which was, please finish this build before my due date. You know, and they were pulling out all the stops to get that done fast. And for me mentally, I was like, I can't even think about the baby arriving until I have my house back, And at first, obviously, originally, it should have been done 2 months before the baby had come, and it would have been great. And that window of, it's, I just want 2 months back in the house. Oh, I just want 1 month back in the house. I'll be happy with 2 weeks. Just get me in there before the baby arrives. Oh, well, the baby's here. I guess, and given that happened in the end, maybe we shouldn't have put that pressure on ourselves.
I guess you're thinking still to do the ground floor extension at some point. I wonder what advice you would give your future self and others in similar situations.
I mean, don't put that pressure on. Give yourself a break and just don't make that deadline a really harsh one, because, you don't do yourself any favors by it. And I think, do really interrogate, if you're using a design build, how much input are you going to give me on working out the internal layout? And, can you run through with me in advance what all those extra costs are likely to be? Because even if we'd asked them in advance, okay, well, can you quote for doing this X, Y, and Z? There might have been some stuff they couldn't have quoted for in advance. As you say, they don't know what tiles we're going to pick. But we could have got more ballpark figures out of them and had a better idea of what that final budget would have been from the beginning if we'd known to ask.
I think that's so key, isn't it?
I think I thought a design build would be more of an all-in-one package than it was. Yeah. And to do the kitchen, I think I am definitely planning on trying to do more of that planning of okay, what splashback do I want? What floor do I want? All those kind of details that I could make the decision of in advance, make it in advance. Potentially we are going to work with an architect or an architectural designer to get more sort of the basic package, even if we then go with the design build company again. I definitely feel like we need more input on that side of things. Take time if you can, and if you're going to do it whilst pregnant, then start as soon as possible and don't be too greedy with your planning permission.
Thank you so much. I loved it. Thank you so much. If you would like to see pictures of Ella's project, then head to our website at homenotes.co/stories from site.